Welcome to Faith Fondue, a podcast featuring author and educator Haley DeMaria and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue features a melting pot of topics, ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. It is the week of July 21st. We are in the 16th Sunday of Ordinary Time. This is Season 4, Episode 14. And Ann, let's jump right into the fire, the flame part of our podcast. But first, I do want to acknowledge that we are really in an extraordinary time in our country right now. And while our podcast, we have always said Faith Fondue will be Switzerland, neutral on all things political, our country is really living history right now. One with the assassination attempt of former President Trump last weekend, and then with the unprecedented withdrawal of President Biden from the 2024 election. So, Ann, all I will say is, as a history major, I am fascinated by all that is transpiring in real time, while certainly praying for the future of our country. I will leave that there. What is hot and burning in your world?
Well, just hearing all that, Haley, makes me think, isn't it? It is amazing to me. We live in a 24-hour news cycle, and yet there's a need for it. Stories are always breaking.
True. So
right?
True.
There's always events. Like if it's, not one thing, it's another. So today, yes, I'm watching the British Open, and in the middle of it, we get the breaking news, this report as well. So yes, I know as a history major, you are able to probably put this in some sort of historical framework. I would imagine if your mind is like mine, I'm American studies. So I think of, yes, it's a reflection of American life and looking back on American life and what this says about American life right now. And I played golf with three extraordinary women yesterday, and golf is great for events because there's a little bit of a cadence. You can talk and then pause, talk and pause, and you can only go so deep. So if it's a difficult conversation, it might not be bad. But we were talking about the likelihood of Biden not running, withdrawing, and locally, Nancy Pelosi is a local, congresswoman from our area, and her role and conversations and leaderships about this. But I had listened to a podcast from The Daily, the New York Times, and it was featuring Robert Putnam, and he wrote Bowling Alone 30 years ago, and it's a reflection on American life that this kind of decline of community and civic engagement. And he has a movie that is out now called Join or Die. So it looks like it's going to be in theaters. But the one thing I will say that stood out to me is he put this again in a historical framework, just American life and the polarization among, the political parties, among people. And he noted it's not just unique to the United States. There are many other countries that have this political polarization, also economic inequality. It's a new Gilded Age. We have that, but it's taking place in other places as well, in France, in Hungary, in Canada. So I just thought that was helpful for me to think we're not alone. But my friend had a very different reaction. She's like, I don't feel better hearing that because we are living it. So it was just again, imagine this taking place on the golf course, that idea, that exchange, and do you take comfort in it or you're still in the middle of it? So.
Right. Well, and of course, Join or Die comes from that very famous political cartoon from, the time of the founding of our country. I'll have to look that up. That's interesting. I also was thinking, I know I had mentioned this probably a couple years ago on this podcast. I always feel like swimmers were the original tweeters. We were very good at life in 140 characters or 150 or whatever it is, because we too would have conversations between sets or between, when you get to the wall, you only have 10, 15 seconds to tell a story. Well, a story could take the whole practice to tell because you only have it in little snips and pieces.
Gosh.
So yes, you can't go too deep all at once, but you can really have a fascinating conversation, and one that I would say, either whether it's golf or with swimming, might be a better conversation because you have time to think before you speak and respond, which we could all do. That would benefit most of us.
Yeah, I love that. By the way, swimmers are the original tweeters. Okay, I want to think about that image and think about in other sports. This is what we do in sports and spirituality. What are the unique ways that athletes are, communicate because of the game or,
Right.
that the practice or whatever the nature of the sport is. So
Yeah, I love
super
that. I
cool.
had never, golf is such a, well, compared to swimming, golf is such a slow sport. So to hear that you have that similar cadence and conversation in golf
Mhm.
is interesting, but
Yep.
it just reminded me of swimming.
Yeah. So speaking of golf, I will be heading to Pebble Beach this week for the Parsegian Classic. So this is a fundraiser run by Cindy and Mike Parsegian to raise money for Niemann-Pick syndrome. They
Hmm.
lost 3 of their 4 children to a rare disease, and they are very close to having a cure. So that's the good news. I will learn more about that during this time. But I've never played, so look forward to reporting back. On actually playing on that course. I know you and I have both been there and enjoy the beauty of Monterey. So pretty excited about that opportunity this
Yeah,
week.
that is exciting.
God,
I often see
yeah.
the invitation to that. And you know me as a golfer, I have not yet made it out there, but it is a fantastic event. And speaking of golf tournaments that you attended, I've seen several clips online of the Kelsey brothers up at Lake Tahoe, but how was that trip?
That was great. They had quite the following. Was expecting it to be honestly like more insane just because of their popularity,
Hmm.
and it was fun. They interact with each other just in the way that you see on social media. I mean, there is no difference. They're there to have a good time. Their energy is really positive. I will say that. Like Jason is not a good golfer. He
Ha!
struggled mightily. Travis has gotten a lot better. Kylie Kelsey was there. She was behind the ropes. That was pretty fun.
Love
But
it.
yeah, some of the highlights, Tim Brown,
Hmm.
wide receiver from Notre Dame, had a hole in one.
Oh,
And
wow.
he had a hole in one on a hole that earned him a Mastercraft boat, a $200,000 boat.
Holy
So
cow.
yeah, he didn't even notice it. And Marcus Allen, his rival from USC, said, "Hey man, that putt went in. I mean, not that putt, your ball went in, like because it's hole in one." So he won that. That was pretty special.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just beautiful up there and great to see just so many different public figures. So
Hmm.
a lot of the players are athletes, former athletes, current athletes though, like Trevor Lawrence was a new participant standing 6'6". You see them in person, right? And you're like, oh wow, like it's a new perspective.
Right.
And then you have some actors, some comedians, a few musicians, and it's just a fun event for middle of summer. So great to be back, and of course, connect with the Notre Dame alumni that are in the tournament. So
Absolutely. That sounds great. One of these years, it may not be anytime soon, I will join you out west for
oh,
one of these
I
fun
would
golf
love that.
tournaments. I know. I would too. I would too.
That'd be super fun. Yeah.
So July for me has been I have decided it has been, and I'm now going to make a mental note of it. This is really self-care month for me. We have a much slower pace at work. I know you are off this month. I am 12 months, so I am still at school, still working on admissions. We still have families that are relocating to the area that I'm working with, but it is a much slower pace, and I do enjoy it. And therefore, I have more time off to connect with friends, which I've done on most weekends. I've been out of town. This is one of the few weekends that I am in town, which is nice. I miss that from, before I started working again full time, having that opportunity to connect with people who are really meaningful to me. It's also just a different time in my life not having kids at home, and I'm not as
Yeah.
busy, with on the weekends with kids and sports and things like that. But I've also noticed that I am scheduling doctor's appointments during July so that I don't miss school or work during the school year. I was at one of my main doctors last week, and she noted that I have turned 50 since I last saw her. And she said, okay, she asked me about my shingles vaccine. I said, I've had both doses. She asked me about, the other fun thing you do when you're 50, which is having a colonoscopy. I said, nope, I did that too. And she looked at me and she said, wow, you're really taking good care of yourself. And I thought, Okay, well
I
maybe
like
I
that.
am. So that's a slight little win. But really it's just this has been a great month for I guess probably for my physical health and my mental health. I have slowed down. I can work out more, walk more, catch up on the things I need to do. For anyone who has not had their shingles vaccine, I will tell you I had an easy time with both doses. That's
Oh,
not always
really?
the news
Okay.
that's reported.
Okay.
And I've also watched some, I don't want to call them trashy TV shows. That's what we call them in our house. They're not trashy, but they're lighter. One of them is called The Queen of Versailles. I don't know if you have heard of this. So
Yeah.
the main reason I heard of it is because I was with two of my Notre Dame teammates last weekend. We went away for the weekend, and one of them continued her trip to Boston after we were together, and she said that she was going to see a musical one night with Kristen Chenoweth in it, who's a singer, a theater actress that we both really like, in this show called The Queen of Versailles, that she said was based on a true story and a documentary that came out in 2012. So I started watching this documentary. It's about 2 hours long, and it is really fascinating about this
Hmm.
couple, the Siegels, David and Jackie Siegel, who were building the largest house in America. And then at the, post 2008 financial crisis had to stop building it. So it is a really fascinating take on the economy, on excessive wealth, on what's really important when you
Mm.
lose that. But so a little bit, but mostly fluff. So it's been fun to have time to do things like that as well.
Okay, so let me
That's a
just
lot
clarify.
to unpack. Yep.
It's a documentary?
It is a documentary.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess when I think fluff, Haley, I think fiction. Is that
Mm,
unfair?
I think that's totally fair because I'm also reading a Ellen Hildebrand books this summer,
Okay, yeah.
and that is
Yes.
fluff,
Yeah.
and that
Right.
is fiction, and that is I think I'm on my fourth book, and I am a slow. I've read a lot of
Yeah.
them because
Okay.
they are fluff. So I would say Queen of Versailles. You're right. A documentary can be very serious, but this is, I
Hmm.
guess, fluff. I'm using fluff in this term in this sense as being easy to watch and perhaps
Yeah.
not a lot of depth.
Okay. We're not dealing with like Jeffrey Epstein here. Like that's what I'm
Definitely
thinking, like
not.
documentary, right? Where I actually decided I watched the first episode. I'm like, I'm good. I don't need it to watch any more of
Right.
this. But yes. So same style, but just content wise, pretty, yeah.
Very different.
A
Very
lot.
different. Yes. Yes.
Okay, now here's our question because I feel like a lot of people have the mindset and the desire to slow down.
Hmm.
So, what advice would you give to our listeners? Because it does sound like you've succeeded at this goal, and
Right.
it's not an uncommon goal, and I think it's a very important one. So, what's how can
How'd
you
I
do?
do it?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I think really what it is just the stage of life that I'm
Hmm.
at and my job. So, because I do have a slower work schedule in the month of July. So that helps right off the bat, right? I don't have to be at school until 9. Usually I have to during the school year I'm there by 7:30. So
Oh
that's an
wow.
hour and a
With the
half in my
kids.
morning that I can either sleep
Yes.
in longer or I can sit and get more done around the house. And I'm done at 3 as opposed to, well, technically 3:45, 4. I probably don't ever leave before 4:30 or 5. So it shortened my day at work. Not everybody has that flexibility. I really only have it during this month. So that's part of it. Two, the two girlfriends I was with last weekend, my two of my Notre Dame teammates, another one is an empty nester, but the third one has middle school children. And so we had a lot of conversations about what life is like when you have children still at home, in particular active children who don't drive yet, and
Yes.
what your
Yeah.
life is like when your children are not living at home. And so I think it's the perfect storm in a good way. So maybe the perfect, I don't know, tropical breeze of having a
Good.
slower work
Yeah.
month and also not having anyone else at home who needs at, you know,
Yeah.
my full-time attention. So I that's not great advice that I can give people, except for to
Yeah.
say it's coming. That's what we kept
Yeah.
telling, you
Yeah.
know, our teammate last week, is you are in the
Yeah.
thick of it right now. You are working full time.
Yeah.
You've got kids who need you. Your
Yep.
time for self-care, while probably more critical at that juncture in your life, it will come.
Yeah.
It will come.
Yeah. Okay, so we will revisit this in October.
Good.
Okay, so we'll see maybe what aspects, because yeah, all of that rings. I would think, I'm sure will ring true or familiar with listeners. So, what will self care look like in a busier time?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why one of the reasons we do love summer, because I think it allows people, like you said, a work schedule that maybe is a little different. Not for everybody,
Right.
certainly for me or teachers, but you know, a lot of places the days are longer too. So you just, I think sometimes you feel like you get more out of the day.
True. True.
There is a huge difference to me between 7:30 and 9 as a start time.
Huge. Huge.
Yes,
Game
it's
changing. Truly.
big time. Yeah.
Yes.
So
And it's also, you know, if I'm not there by 7:30, it's noticed. If I roll in
mhm,
at 9:15, there's no students
yeah,
there. So
yeah,
there's that flexibility as well.
yeah, right. Okay, well, I want to talk before we move into our next into what's our second section, our
Spiritual
spiritual
stew.
stew. Okay, I want to talk about leadership, what I call leadership 101,
Mm-hmm.
and it's related to going back to school.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm mentally preparing for this. Notre Dame's new quarterback, Riley Leonard, who's coming from Duke University, arrived in South Bend in January. One of the things that he did to prepare was he created a Quizlet and he memorized the names and faces of all his teammates.
That's amazing.
And it was a total game changer, because how great does it feel when you meet a leader and they know your name
Yep.
and they know your face, who you are? And I just thought I've seen this. I've seen this in great leaders
Mm-hmm.
where they know the names and they know people's families. And I've seen the opposite. And where leaders like don't, they like, I know a leader who's like, I will never know your name. So, you know, please forgive me. That's just the way I am.
Huh.
I knew another leader who knew it was a liability for him, but he got someone to kind of help him, where he would like say, you know, whisper in my left ear, you know, Haley DeMaria,
Right.
95, Haley Scott, type of thing. So I thought that was a good tactic for knowing yourself. But
Right.
whatever it is, I think it's important. So I am going to try before. So I'm pretty good with names and faces. With my students, it usually takes me about 2 weeks. But my goal is before the school year starts is to know all their names. So on that first day of class, I'm going to be like, well, welcome back, Jack. How's it going? How are you? Like, even if I don't know them, I really want to see, just, I'm curious, is it going to be a different atmosphere by knowing the names and faces of my students up front versus like learning it as we go?
Right. So how many students will you have in the fall?
So I'll have 60. So I have two
Okay.
sections of sports and spirituality. So this is very doable. And I may know some of them already.
Right.
So that's
Right.
doable.
Fair.
But yeah, I'm excited. So
That is
we'll see.
exciting. Good for you. That's a
Yeah.
great challenge. And speaking of leadership, and we can certainly talk about this the next couple times that we meet, is Father Malloy, Monk Malloy, the former president of Notre Dame, wrote a book on leadership that I know we are both going to make sure we read so that we can talk about it. But I just got notification that one, will be in the Bay Area soon, and then two,
Yeah.
he's coming to Maryland to say Mass and promote his book in August. So I'll get to see him there too.
Awesome.
But he's got some interesting takes on leadership as well that we can certainly talk about in a
Yeah.
future episode.
Yes. So yeah, I thought that was cool about him. And because, you know, these things carry over into other aspects of our life. I came out of Mass today, and I was excited about Riley and just thinking about him. I think I was at my parents' house and I saw an interview with him. So that's how I knew about this. I said to a friend, I said, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you about Riley Leonard? And so we were about to talk, and in the middle of the conversation, he stops our conversation to talk to a family that he had run into the day before. and dropped our conversation. And so I felt pretty dismissed.
Yes, sure.
And I engaged with the family, and then I said, okay, well, I'm going to, have a good day. And then he answered my question, but I thought, this is interesting. This is the opposite of interrupting someone.
Right.
I don't know what to call it. Does that make sense? Like, so we're
Yes.
talking, and then he doesn't interrupt me, or he interrupts our conversation to talk to somebody else. But I thought, leadership 201
Right.
just finish your thought with somebody, and then acknowledge somebody else. Or I don't know, leaders struggle with this. I've seen them because they're in demand, they're on, but it's like, I just didn't know what to call it. I felt very dismissed.
So and I'm sure you did. I know exactly how you feel. That's a good takeaway for us, is we have to figure out what that term is, because it happens all the time, happens to everyone. And what you feel like is the person who you are being, in your words, dismissed for. You feel like they're more important to the person you were speaking with than you are. And that's a terrible way to make someone feel, whether it's true or not. Okay, so we'll put that in our takeaways to come up with a term.
And we've all done it. And I would love some tactics or ideas, because I did work with someone I usually try to make eye contact with the other person, just to say, hey, but I knew a leader who wouldn't even make eye contact with the outside person until she was done. So, different leadership styles, but there's something to keep cooking over the flame. So.
Yes, absolutely. So spiritual stew this week, today's gospel, and the first reading actually too. We heard a lot about shepherds, shepherding. In particular, there was a quote in the gospel that reads, "For they were like a sheep without a shepherd." And I thought about this for a number of different reasons. One, I've mentioned him on the last several podcasts. The athletic director when we were at Notre Dame, was Dick Rosenthal, and he recently passed away. And I shared with his family a long letter. It was about 4 pages, single spaced, just with memories and reflections of my experience with him, things they might have known, things they may not have known. And I did include a picture. And so when I heard this line in particular today, it reminded me of this picture. And I do think I used it on our podcast 2 episodes ago, but it really looks like him holding me up and guiding me. And so I have thought about that, or thought about it certainly when I heard they were like a sheep without a shepherd, because that's really what I was. And here in this picture, it really illustrates Dick on behalf of the university, really shepherding me at a time when I was lost, which I didn't know at the time. So this really all came together because there is an older gentleman that I've worked with for the past few years. He is the founder and CEO of a company called Origin Entertainment. They are a production company that focuses in really wanting to promote and put more positive, family-friendly entertainment out there. Their whole belief is there's so much junk out there, so many movies, TV shows, everything that do not have great role models for young people. And if that's all that's out there, that is all young people are going to see. And so their whole goal is to make sure that they are putting positive content out to help provide different role models for young people. So I've been working with him on this never-ending movie project based on my book that has been going on forever. But it was nice to reconnect with him because we were catching up. He's had some real significant challenges over the past 12 months. And he knew around this time last year, I was really struggling with my friend Sully's son, who was very sick and then passed. So we really reconnected. And he pointed out something to me that I think I knew, but he said it in a way that really resonated with me. And, I talked about Dick, and I had mentioned this letter that I had sent to Dick's family, and had kind of just mentioned, as a history major, I referred to these 3 particular leaders as the big 3, my big 3. And I think I've mentioned that here too. Of course, that's Dick Rosenthal, our athletic director, Father Malloy, who was the president of Notre Dame at the time, and then, of course, my swim coach, Tim Welsh. And he said to me, "Gosh, Haley, do you know how blessed you are to have such great people in your life. And I think I did know that, but he kept going and just said, not everybody has that. Not everybody, when they are lost or suffering, or even when life is going well, many people don't have that number of high quality people in their lives. And again, I think I knew that, but he said it in a way that just really resonated with me. And then also followed up on something, a quote that I wrote down that I'm trying to keep in mind as well, that is along these lines. And that was something along the lines of, experience is only a great teacher, or only the best teacher, if you learn the right lessons. And I learned the right lessons, or at least I hope, or at least this is what this gentleman was sharing with me, because I had these great leaders.
Wow.
I was living this really rough experience, and yet I had these shepherds in my life who took me down the path of experience to make sure that I would learn the right lessons. So when I heard that in the gospel, it really spoke to me, because I've been reflecting on this conversation for the past several days, and just feel really called to make sure that as the sheep, I am honoring what these shepherds, the gifts these shepherds have given to me.
Yeah. I love all the connections you made between just your own experience, but also the gospel there. I mean, that's what it's the living gospel. But it's interesting when somebody like this man is able to point that out, and we have this openness to hearing it, because you're like, I knew it, but then it's like the timing of the readings or the gospel. That's why it's so great to hear them again, because
Yes.
Nick's life and the timing of this letter that you wrote, it's so seminal. It's really beautiful. But I appreciate that he pointed it out, but that you heard it too. I mean, because somebody can point something out doesn't mean we always hear it.
True.
You
True.
know? Yeah. So
Well, these are the moments when you think, okay, all of these, the Holy Spirit brought all
yeah,
of this
yeah,
together in my life. So
yeah,
now what's my next step?
yeah, yeah. And that's where, that's the space for prayer, right?
Right.
Like right there,
Yes.
like you just open that up, and yeah, what is that? And I do love the historical connection though, because the image of the big three, and
Yes.
yes, the three of them dialoguing up in heaven, perhaps.
Boy, can you imagine that
Yeah,
conversation as they're, looking down now, and
yeah.
they probably have a lot to say.
But it's true, there are great people. There are people who really do lead. Not everyone needs to lead. We need good people in other ways, but I
Yes.
mean, thank God for good leaders. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. uh, but yeah, the shepherd is such a great image. When I saw your notes to write about it, I thought about, I don't know when I learned this, but it wasn't in high school, it wasn't in college. But for many years, the primary image of Christ in a church was the Good Shepherd. It wasn't Jesus on the cross. It wasn't a crucifix. And what a different message that sends. But
Right. Interesting.
it's that theme though, first reading, and then the Psalm 23, right? And
Yes.
then our gospel reading. But I was struck in that gospel reading just about, the connection to last week, when Jesus chooses these disciples, and they go out two by two, and just that notion of being missioned and commissioned, kind of set out, and then inevitably they come back, right? They gather, and I really thought about my experience as an ACE teacher, when I was brand new to teaching, and how we felt missioned and commissioned to go out and to spread the gospel. And there is an energy, but that energy, you need the recharge. So they come back.
Right.
And then, Jesus meets their physical needs, but their spiritual needs, right? They're hungry, they go on a boat, they get away, and just kind of trying to imagine what were their conversations like. And that's where Jim Martin, the Jesuit, is really big on putting yourself in the gospel scene, imagining yourself in that boat, or what they're doing, and what would we be hearing, what would we be thinking. But again, Mark brings it back to, they needed a shepherd,
Right.
And they're in a boat, but yet the image is the shepherd, and they're sheep without, they need that shepherd. He knows their voice, he knows to care for them. So Yeah, let's pray uh, for the Good Shepherd, or with that image of Jesus in mind.
Right, absolutely. And making sure that when we are in positions of leadership, because sometimes we are and sometimes we're not, that
True.
we as leaders make sure that we're shepherding in the right way, which I know you're going to do when you learn all of your students' names.
I hope so. Yeah. Stay tuned.
So, a lot of this, with our takeaway, with the melting pot, it is recommitting myself to working on the project that it has kind of been never ending. And it's twofold. One, it's certainly making sure I do what I can do to help Origin Entertainment move this movie progress along. But one of the things that I have been thinking about for a long time, and I might have mentioned it to you before here and there, but I did have a conversation with Origin about it this past week, is writing another book. And I don't know what that book is. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know necessarily exactly what it's about, but my first book was everything about my story through 2008 when the book came out. And maybe the half part of the last chapter kind of caught everybody up on life after I graduated from Notre Dame. So, not a whole lot beyond kind of the nuts and bolts of my story. And what I have learned since I've started sharing this story, so the past 16 years, is really there what an extraordinary journey it was. So I probably have learned as much in the last 16 years since I
Yeah.
first started sharing my story about life, about community, about faith, about hardship, about a lot. I've learned as much in the last 16 years after I published my book as I did during the first 16 years before my book came out, when I was actually living that experience. So,
Mm,
and that's
mm,
so much of what I like to share
mm,
when I speak. My speaking has evolved. My presentation has evolved so much from
mhm.
when the book first came out to now 16 years later, because I have had these lessons I've learned along the way. And so, how do I share that? Maybe it's just still through speaking, but how do I share those lessons? Is there a way to share those lessons
Mm.
in written form that stems from really what I've learned now 32 years later? So, we'll see. When I say I'm
Yeah.
going to recommit myself to writing, it's just sort of a dump, right? It's journaling, it's putting things down, it's seeing what sticks, but nothing's going to stick if I don't start.
That's true. That's atomic habits right there. Small things every single day. When you wrote that you want to recommit to writing, I was like, applause, because I just think you're a really good writer, and I think the world needs, you know, things in writing and stories to be
Mm-hmm.
learned and passed on. So I'll only encourage you to write. And I'm like, okay, so what are your ideas? Let's get some tips too for writing, because
Right.
I'm always thinking, part of me is like, it's a terrible lot in life to be a writer, because you're always carrying these ideas that need to get out of you. And so yesterday for golf, I mean, I showed up 20 minutes before my tee time because I was finishing a blog. So part of me is like, don't be a writer.
Ha.
But there is one idea that I will pass on, and I think it's true. Elizabeth Gilbert, she's the author of Eat, Pray, Love.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about writing as a spirit, and she's like, there's something in you, and if it needs to be written, it's alive. And if it's not supposed to be written, the spirit's gone. And she has this awesome example. She was given an advance to write a certain story, and she was ready to do it, and she was like, had enough content to do it, and then she just felt the spirit go away.
Mm.
And at the same time, somebody else that she knew wrote about the same topic, and it was like right when it left her, so to speak, this other person got the idea and went with it. So I guess I offer that as like a sort of freedom, like in a way. It's like if it's there with you, it'll be there and it'll emerge. And if it's not, then there's, like you mentioned, your talks, I mean, even just
Agreed.
blogging. But yeah, there will be other ways to share that message. But the best way to do it is to start writing.
Just
So
start. That's
yeah,
my,
and
just
see where
start.
it goes. I love it. I will only encourage you. I'll be giving you high fives on the way.
Well, thank you. Not only encouraging me, but holding me to it a little bit. So
Yeah.
I throw
Well,
that
there's no
out
need
there.
for that.
I really,
Yeah.
I share this really to help have you help me stay accountable.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I have some work to do there too then. All right.
How about you?
Um,
What's your takeaway?
okay. Well, you did mention kind of like just easy reading, or I don't know, it's not easy reading, but like summer read or self-care. I am a little dissatisfied with my summer reading. So I
Mm,
want to read a great book before I go back to school. Right now, I will say I'm reading Jay Billis's book. It's called Toughness. It was recommended by a friend.
okay.
Jay Billis was a Duke basketball
Mm-hmm.
player, went on to law school as an basketball analyst. I'm not a huge fan, but
Mm-hmm.
I respect him, and yeah, and he was in the tournament at Tahoe, and I did say to him, I said, "Hey, Jay, I'm reading your book. I'm enjoying it because there are things that I enjoy, but for me, and I think this is true for most people, the more we can relate to something like that, the more we get out of it." So he's mentioning people that I'm slightly, Christian Leitner, sure, I remember it. Coach K, of
Right.
course. Other players, I'm like, I'm not a Duke enthusiast, so it's not, it's still real, the example, but it's not like I'm soaking it in.
Right.
And I need and want a book this summer. I got to do that. Just a great read where I'm like, my mind feels nourished and engaged. So um, that needs to happen in the next few weeks because I go back to school pretty soon.
So offline, I will send you a couple of recommendations of books
Okay.
that I think would fit that billing. What I will say, just off the top of my head, anecdotally, Toughness by Jay Billis is probably more along the lines of what you teach. So that
Mm,
falls right in with your class with sports and
yeah.
spirituality. I don't know if there's any spirituality in there, but you teach and write about sports all the time. So
Yeah.
a summer read for me, and maybe this is where the word fluff comes in, is a break from what we are normally reading. So
Yes.
I will send you some recommendations and ideas
Yeah.
that are not sports related so that you can just kind of check out. Because my guess is you're reading this book and you're thinking, can I use this? Is there a
Yeah.
story I can share? Is
Yeah.
there something
Right.
there? So you're not turning your brain off. And not
Yeah.
that you can ever turn your brain off when you read, but there's because there
Yeah.
really are some powerful books that are
Yeah.
great summer reads. But I'm going to guess one about sports is probably not
Yeah.
for you.
Well, I appreciate the context. That's helpful because I'm just like, yeah, okay. Yeah.
And
So
that's
Ellen Hildebrand would be it.
well, yes, she certainly is the definition of fluff. But
Yeah.
she's selling a lot of it, so that's not a that's not a slam.
Right. She's on to something.
She
Yep.
is. Well, Anne, certainly enjoy your trip up to Pebble Beach this weekend. I know you will. We are almost done with the month of July and moving into the month of August, and yeah, then we'll excuse me, be back at it. So I hope you have an awesome week, and we will connect soon.
Likewise. Thank you.